researched the neurological effects of aluminum nitrate 9-hydrate on the behavior of Cinereophdidus elegans. Aluminum is pervasive in many everyday products that we use. I'm sure you come across it on a daily basis, whether that be through your diet, through foods and cookware, or or your occupation, if you're in the fields of medicine, food technology, or cosmetics. In fact, nearly 10 milligrams of aluminum is taken to the human body on a daily basis. With its prevalent nature, the question of aluminum's toxicity arose. Numerous studies have revealed that aluminum has adverse effects on the central nervous system. However, the fact of causation is still unclear. Despite the controversy, aluminum's exposure has been correlated with many neurodegenerative diseases, including those of Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and multiple sclerosis. So, people have been considering aluminum as a neurotoxin. So, Parkinson's disease, the second most common neurodegenerative disease, is the result of a significant loss of dopaminergic neurons. If the dopamine levels of an organism decreases following subjection to aluminum, the theory of aluminum's correlation to neurodegenerative diseases may be supported. On the account of dopamine's presence in the model organism Cinereophdidus elegans, which is the instrument that I utilized for the study, we could use this to properly investigate the neurodegenerative processes of aluminum. So C. elegans is a very advantageous model organism for this study because it can be used to study neurodegeneration caused by metals. The worm's benefits consist of its transparency, small size, quick life cycle, and simple maintenance. It also shares a lot of genes with humans, approximately 60 to 80%. It also consists of 302 neurons, a majority of which of the neurotransmitters are homologous to humans, including a central nervous system with motor and sensory neurons. Heavy metals, a known cause of Parkinson's disease, can cause dopaminergic degeneration in C. elegans. And we can assess that, and we see this through numerous studies. It can be assessed through the locomotion and food sensing abilities of these worms. I also utilized a mutated worm, which has a mutation in the SMF3 gene. The SMF3 is a metal transporter gene, and it plays a role in aluminum-associated neuropathology. It is also a homolog to the human DMT1, or divalent metal transporter 1. And this is a gene expressed in dopaminergic neurons. And a mutation in this gene may disrupt the function aluminum plays in dopaminergic neurodegeneration. Here you can see a study that I researched, and they tested to see if a mutation in the SMF3 gene would have resistance to aluminum's effect in comparison to the wild type. And you can see in this graph that the SMF3 did have resistance, and that star indicates a significant difference. So my rationale, my purpose was to investigate the behavior of C. elegans after coming in contact with aluminum and to support the theory of aluminum exposure inducing neurological disorders. And I also wanted to assess the role of the SMF3 gene. So my research questions were, will aluminum exposure induce a decrease in the locomotion and chemotaxis of the N2 wild type C. elegans and the mutant C. elegans strain, indicating dopaminergic degeneration? And will the mutant strain display resistance to aluminum, implying a correlation between the SMF3 gene and aluminum-induced neurodegeneration? I also hypothesized that by exposing a concentration of aluminum nitrate to the N2 wild type C. elegans through the food source E. coli OP50, the locomotion, which I assessed through sinusoidal wave undulations, and the chemotaxis, or the chemotaxis index, or the percent of immobile worms of the exposed worms will be significantly different compared to the unexposed worms. By exposing a concentration of aluminum nitrate to mutant C. elegans through E. coli OP50, the locomotion and the chemotaxis of the exposed worms will not be significantly different compared to the unexposed worms. Here are some of my notable materials that I utilized for the study: aluminum nitrate, my N2 wild type strain, and the RB1074 strain, which has that mutation in the SMF3 gene. And I listed some other materials that I utilized for my study. I'm going to do a run through some of my variables. So I utilized, for my independent variables, I had the presence of aluminum nitrate solution, my wild type versus the mutant strain. For my dependent variables, I had the number of sinusoidal wave undulations in 1 minute, my chemotaxis index, and the percent of immobile worms. I also have some controls: the wild type with no aluminum exposure, my DH2O during chemotaxis, which acted as my negative control, and my sodium chloride during chemotaxis, which acted as my positive control, because sodium chloride is a known attractant, known positive attractant for chemotaxis for C. elegans. And I also listed some constants as well. So I'm going to run you through my procedure. So I started off by preparing 40 NGM agar Petri plates. Then I inoculated E. coli LP50. I seeded those NGM agar plates. I prepared growth plates of C. elegans through chunking, and then I chunked for locomotion, and I observed locomotion. And I'll elaborate further on how I did that. Then I prepared growth plates for chemotaxis by chunking. I prepared for chemotaxis, and to clarify, chemotaxis is the directed migration towards some kind of substance. And in this case, that was the sodium chloride. And then I performed chemotaxis for the worms with aluminum and without aluminum. I scored the assay, and then I analyzed the data. So here's my experimental setup. I had approximately 3 plates for each condition for my sinusoidal waves, and 3 worms for each of those plates, so 9 replicates for each. And I had approximately 5 chemotaxis plates for all 4 conditions that are listed right here. And here's a more elaborate breakdown of how I utilize my 40 plates. And this is how I broke down my chemotaxis plate. Here you can see in quadrants 1 and 4, so diagonal from each other, where my test quadrants are my sodium chloride positive chemoattractants, and my quadrants 2 and 3 were my control, or my negative, or the DH2O. And I also pipetted the worms onto the circle at 5. And to elaborate on my method of data collection, I essentially measured the sinusoidal wave cycles for the worms. The worms move in these undulations, and so I pretty much counted the number of crest to crest or trough to trough movements of these worms in a 20-second time interval after tapping the side of the petri dishes, and I multiplied that value by 3 to get it in a 1 minute per 1 minute value. And then for chemotaxis, you can see here, this is what it would have looked like. It would be more concentrated in these positive areas compared to the negative quadrants. And then I performed my statistical analysis. I assessed the means and the t-test values for each condition and all my dependent variables. So to run you through some of my results, here are my sinusoidal wave for my locomotion results. If you can see here at my positive, the wild type without aluminum, there's approximately 16.67 sinusoidal waves per minute. But when compared into when it was induced with aluminum, that value decreased to approximately 11.67, indicating that there was some sort of negative effect and it decreased the mobility of these worms. But compared to my mutated strain, without aluminum had approximately 20.67, but when induced with aluminum, that value actually increased, which was unexpected, but it shows how there was no there was some sort of resistance to the aluminum as it did not decrease in mobility. And here's a table for my t-test values. You can see the significant difference between the wild type without aluminum and the wild type with aluminum. And my wild type with aluminum and my SMF3, or the mutated strain with aluminum, had a significant difference, showing that a mutation in this SMF3 gene does play a difference, or does play an effect. And I also have a visual representation of my data through a bar graph. So here are my results for my chemotaxis index. You can see here that my mean value for my wild type without aluminum was approximately 0.35, but when induced with aluminum, there was a negative value. And I forgot to clarify, but a negative chemotaxis index value means repulsion, meaning it did not move towards a positive chemoattractant, losing its food sensing abilities, while a positive chemo index value means that it maintained its food sensing abilities and was able to move towards the chemoattractant. So you can see here all of these values, all of these mean values for my chemotaxis indexes are all positive other than my wild type with aluminum, showing that aluminum does have an effect. And also shows that my mutated strain had a resistance to the aluminum. And while unexpected, all my t-tests were non-significant. And this was likely due to a limitation in my project because I probably pipetted too many worms to the center plates, causing some inconsistencies. And here's my visual representation. And you can see that these error bars are very significant, showing that error in my experiment. And here are my results for my percent of immobile worms. I decided to do this assay just to have another assessment on the effect of aluminum on the food sensing and mobility of the worms. So you could see here that my wild type without aluminum had approximately 80% of immobile worms in the center, but when with exposed with aluminum had 80%. So there was really no change in between, and this was likely due to a limitation or an error, and I'll show that in a second. And compared to my mutated strain, which had approximately 46%, but when with aluminum, it had 26%, showing that it was able to resist the aluminum and it was able to be mobile and maintain its food sensing abilities. And here's another visual representation of my data. So to show my error, you can see that there's a lot of chunks of worms, especially in this one right here, my 5 mutant plates without aluminum exposure. And there's still some chunks over here. Um, and this was likely due to me pipetting too many worms onto the center, um, and maybe not properly mixing the worms enough for them to be spread out. So, in conclusion, aluminum acted as a neurotoxin that influenced the behavior linked to the neuromuscular control system, and we saw that through the locomotion and the chemotaxis of C. elegans. And the presence of the element demonstrated a general negative trend in the wild type worms and a positively moderate to no trend in the mutant strain, constituting the SMF3 variable, revealed the gene's transporting role and how a mutation has the ability to prevent neurodegeneration. But without consistent, significant differences, the hypothesis cannot be completely supported, rather only partially supported, and needs further experimentation. Filling the flawed voids and correcting the errors of the study would be a viable plan for future experimentation and research. However, such an investigation will simply only provide more concrete results. Therefore, a different approach to assessing the aluminum's efficacy will be more high yielding in alleviating the effects, the controversy of aluminum's correlation to neurodegeneration. While the in vitro aspect of aluminum's effect has been studied, an in vivo examination of aluminum's neurotoxicity on C. elegans will further enhance the study and provide evidence as to what role aluminum truly plays in neurodegenerative diseases. The element is too common in human life to be merely ignored if such a perilous aspect of the metal exists. If more research is carried out regarding aluminum's neurotoxicity, the causes of Parkinson's disease can be studied more in depth and aid in preventing the disease. So that was my research and my experimentations. Thank you.